So, second game of the tournament. We're facing a pretty strong player, Avodah, 2195 in rating. And we have the black pieces, so let's see what happens. So d4, we're just going to play knight f6 here, and now make a decision. Should we go for something more Grunfeld? Should we go for a knight f6 e6 setup? Let's go a little bit more classical here with knight f6 e6. Really very flexible setup, not what I would recommend maybe for players who are new to the game, because there's a lot of transpositions, crazy amount of theory, but at the highest level, this move order of knight f6 and e6 is the most common move order that you see, and with good reason, because there are so many possibilities here. You can switch to Benoni setups, you can go d5 and go more Queen's Gambit decline stuff, you can go bishop b4 and go more like Bogo Indian setups. You can even go what I'm going to do, b6, which is to go for a Queen's Indian setup. Vishwa says, we would love to see you playing an equal or high-rated opponent and have equally good analysis. That would be more interesting. You know what? Analysis actually tends to get poorer the more relatively equal that the opponents are. And the reason for this is because when you're speaking about stuff, it's inevitably going to distract you a little bit. And so if your opponent is just as good as you, usually that means that if you are spending too much time analyzing and talking about it, etc., then you play with a big disadvantage, and usually it ends quite horribly. So I find that the best type of players to analyze, the best kind of games, is when somebody is maybe something like this. You know, there's a couple of 100 points gap, but certainly still a very strong chess player, and I can sort of balance out the game a little bit by commentary. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully that addresses your point. But still, in principle, I'd be happy to face off against equal strength opponents. I really do think, though, that the most instructive is actually when one of the players is substantially stronger, especially because when you have these games that are super high level, like modern games, some of the moves, they're so subtle and they're so deep that it's harder to understand the plans and the logic behind them. It's less accessible for the club player than other lower rated games. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's keep going. Now I'm actually going to play h5, and it looks like I've gone completely kamikaze. Let's focus on this game for a bit now. It looks like I'm going completely kamikaze, but the idea is a typical pattern that you see sometimes arising even against the Caro-Kann or even against some Slav setups, when in that case it's usually black who has this bishop, not this one, who has this bishop on g6, usually like this, and then that bishop gets harassed. The point of my move is that after h5 I want to play the move h4, and then where does the bishop go? It would only be able to go to e5, and then that's when I play the move f6. And you can see that the bishop will have no move, no square. So white is being asked by black this big question, what are you going to do about h4? And so he himself plays h4. But the idea here is that now, let's say I play the move g4. Once he moves his knight, my intention is to probably capture here on g3, force him to take back with the f-pawn, and in the end his structure is going to look like this. So that is what we're going to see now. I could, for example, take intermezzo here. That's why I'm hesitating. But I feel that it's probably a good idea for me to keep this bishop. So I play knight takes g3. And now after f takes g3, it's not like it's a huge end of the world kind of deal. But after f takes g3, he will have a slightly weaker structure than I think he would like. So now my question is, should I hack away along the dark squares? My concern is that he's actually relatively soon potentially going to be developed. He also has a little bit of a center here, and my bishop is also a little bit vulnerable. So I feel like I don't have all the time in the world that I can start playing pawn moves. This might be completely wrong. I'm actually, now the more I think about it, the more that I'm tempted to play the move c5. You know what? I'm changing my opinion. It is a little bit risky because the second I play this move, you can see there's suddenly a hole on d6, and you might picture some ideas like this, which would be really quite nasty fork here against the king and bishop. But the reason why I've gone for c5 is that I want to hack away along the dark squares. I also want to maybe think about putting the queen on c7 and striking at this created weakness here on g3. And I also, when I play the move knight c6, I want that extra pressure on d4 to force White's hand and force him to react. So my opponent's gone a little bit into the tank here. Okay, he's gone for a3, which is a move that makes a lot of sense. But I'm going to play c takes d4 here. If he now goes e takes d4, then I get to drop the bishop back to a good square. He goes a takes b4. He does win this bishop. He should be quite happy about winning my dark square bishop because he has all these weaknesses on the dark squares. So for me to have had the dark square bishop and him not would have been quite unpleasant. But on the other hand, now maybe I go here, or maybe I go, yeah, I like this e7. It looks a little bit more passive, but my idea was to go to f5. So on the one hand, he's won that, but on the other hand, I've managed to complete my queenside development, taking the pieces to good squares overall. And now maybe I can even consider breaking with this move f5. He doesn't take. I think the reason why he doesn't take is because after knight takes f5, I would have pressure here and also pressure here. So he goes like this, but this does give me a pawn, and I think I can just take it. My intention is to at some point put the knight on f5. That's going to be a beautiful square because all of these squares are very weak. But for the time being, he's threatening to take the pawn. So I'll go queen e5. One of the things is I don't want to play d5 here. It would defend the pawn, but after pawn takes, my queen would be under fire. So he goes king there. And now I will put the knight on f5. In the future, definitely d5 is a possibility here. I'm also threatening some knight takes h4 ideas because he could not take due to this pin. And here after rook f4, now I can still consider knight takes for these reasons. But also I think knight takes g3, king takes g3, and rook here. Can he defend the rook in any way? I'm not seeing any way to defend the rook. And that's much more appealing than taking here, because if I take here, he can take here. But if I take here, I think I'm going to go for it. Then the point is, if he goes rook takes, then queen takes rook. If he takes here, that's definitely not going to work, because first of all, his rook is hanging. And anyway, now my knight is pressing. And I think this might be, unless I've miscalculated, I think that this is simply winning because the point is I have a double threat. Queen takes rook and knight takes bishop. And if he goes king takes, that way he defends his rook and he wins a piece. But then comes the move rook f8. And after rook f8, I don't see any... I don't see, his pieces are just a little bit, the knight is impossible to defend this rook. The bishop, of course, cannot defend a dark square. This rook cannot, you know, the only way would be like this, but of course we're taking it. And the queen is, unfortunately for him, blocked off here. So I'll go queen takes. If g3, I'll be able to give this check here and win a piece, at the very least. So I'm expecting, I guess, a move like king h1. He goes there instead, that makes sense. And now what I'm going to play is, I'm going to play... No, if I go queen f2, then he can go knight takes e4. So what should I do here? I could go maybe queen f6. No, you know what? Let's just bring another piece into the game. Let's go queen e5 here. And d5. And now I just want d4 and d3. I think my opponent, he's putting his he's placing his bets on the possibility of flagging me if I'm honest. And that's fair enough, because that's definitely his position is really quite horrible. I'm just going to try and get my king to relative safety. I dropped this bishop, but okay. Yeah. So I was playing a little bit fast there just in case towards the end. Hello, The Truth ICC, by the way.